So, good morning. It is so good to see you all, and thank you all for joining us for the 42nd Annual Everett C. Parker Lecture. My name is Charles Jefferson. I am a member of the UCC Media Justice Board, and I also serve as the Director of Marketing and Communications for the National Ministries of the United Church of Christ in Cleveland, Ohio. We want to welcome everyone who is here with us in person and everyone who has joined us online. We join every year to celebrate the legacy of our ministry's founder, the Reverend Dr. Everett Parker, and honor those who are carrying forward his work in the present day. If you are joining us online, please introduce yourselves in the comments. We also invite you to use the hashtag ParkerLecture2024 as we create a shared community and celebrate our honorees online and in person. To begin our event today, we acknowledge our presence on the land historically occupied by the native Piscataway peoples and express our gratitude to our hosts, the First Congregational United Church of Christ of Washington, D.C. I now want to call the Reverend Amanda Hindler-Voss, the pastor of this church, to offer our invocation.
Good morning, and welcome to the 42nd Annual Parker Lecture, honoring the legacy of Everett C. Parker. My name is Reverend Amanda Hindler-Voss, and I have the blessing of serving as the senior minister here at First Congregational United Church of Christ, a joyful and justice-seeking church in the heart of our nation's capital. As we say every Sunday, no matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. I want to ground us this morning. I know this was already mentioned, but I want to ground us this morning with this acknowledgement. Situated at the confluence of the Potomac and Anacostia rivers, this event takes place on the grounds of the ancestral homelands of the Piscataway people, the people where the rivers blend, and of the Nacotchtank Anacostan people. We honor their resistance and resilience in the face of land appropriation and cultural suppression, and the enduring spirit of diverse Native communities represented by those who make their home in this area today. Will you pray with me? Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on we who are gathered here today, seeking a world where your justice rolls down like waterfalls and your righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Morning has broken, and we greet this fresh-made day, blessed by breath and belonging, blessed by the eternal word and sacred silence, blessed by the miracle of your yes upon our lives and your song alive in our hearts. We thank you for the blessing of the remarkable leaders honored here today, Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke, Assistant Secretary Alan Davidson, and media reporter Paul Farhi. For their grit, persistence, and unflinching willingness to tell the truth, we give you thanks, O God. Make us this day compassionate of heart, clear in word, courageous in spirit, generous in love. Amen.
Thank you so much, Reverend Amanda. We're so glad to be here at the UCC here in DC. It's an incredible tradition every year, and we're so glad to see everybody else who's able to come. First, I just want to acknowledge we have some awesome folks who joined us today. FCC Commissioner Ana Gomez, great, and also two former acting chairs, Mignon Clyburn and Michael Copps. So. In addition, after 40 years, oh, and I was gonna say, in addition, actually, we also have so many people here from Capitol Hill, from the FCC, the chair's office of the FCC, the NTIA, so we're really glad that so many people have taken their time to be with us this morning. And in addition, after 40 years of honoring folks, we have a lot of previous honorees here in the room, so just give a wave if we've ever honored you before. I see you, yay, thank you so much, thank you so much. We're so glad to see you all. It's really, really wonderful that people are able to make their time today. So in addition to calling out the best and the brightest among us, one of the functions of today's event is to make sure that we have the resources to do our work. So we are really wanting to acknowledge and thank so much our sponsors for this morning. The staff members of these companies are our colleagues or friends. We talk together, we work together. Sometimes we don't agree, but through that conversation and listening, we are able to create a better, more diverse, more respectful, affordable media for everybody. So now I'm going to thank our sponsors and just hold your applause till the end. Our lead sponsor is Meta. Our patrons are Comcast, Google, and the United Church of Christ. Our nonprofit and corporate special friends, Benton Institute for Broadband and Society, Best and Krieger, Charter Communications, and Nelson Mullins. And finally, we have an incredible supporter circle, so let's give all of them a round of applause. I want to thank everyone who lent their support in any way, whether it's just coming today, whether they're making a donation or buying a ticket. And it would be remiss if I didn't ask you, it is not too late to join them. There's a QR code above, there's QR codes around. If you're online, you'll see a link. Every little bit helps, and it really makes a difference. Like, this event is how we run all the work for the whole year. So this is it. We'll certainly ask you again sometimes. And then finally, I did also want to thank the staff of First Church here. Byron Adams has been so great. Graham's up in the AV booth. We've got people doing chairs, and so the whole staff here really pitches in, and we really appreciate everything they did to help make this event a successful one today. And Courtney Weber, our meeting planner, who you've seen running around, has probably sent you many thankful, gracious, wonderful emails and taken care of every single detail. So we're really grateful to Courtney. She's done an amazing, amazing job. So thank you, Courtney. So every year, this gives us a quick chance to take a look at the things we've accomplished since last year. And you might remember that last year, FCC Chair Jessica Rosenworcel was here, and she took the opportunity, giving her lecture, of announcing what the FCC intended to do, what proposals she intended to put in front of her fellow commissioners in order to implement the new digital non-discrimination law. And we broke out into applause, which, you know, we're geeky Washington audience. Like, disparate impact, yes. So it happened that way. So and so that was great. The FCC adopted that order. But of course, a lot of 2024 has been about defending that order in court. And UCC Media Justice has been there as an amicus and been there advising and collaborating with everybody who's working in court. And there's an oral argument tomorrow. So good luck to that team. Thank you so much. Oh, we're so glad. So then another major achievement that happened in the last year, and one of our guests of honor arrived just in time for me to say this, so great. The FCC finally adopted, after a 20-year hiatus, rules requiring transparent workforce diversity data in broadcasting. UCC Media Justice cares about this not only because it's a really good idea, but also because Everett Parker was the one who proposed these rules, these equal employment rules, to the FCC in the 60s, before the Kerner Commission. So we really are grateful that the FCC adopted it, and we are incredibly grateful to FCC Commissioner Jeffrey Starks and for Congresswoman Clark for really championing the FCC's decision to bring these rules back into place. Once again, we're going to defend them in court. There's a little bit of a theme here. Great decision, defend it in court. But we're really glad. We're really glad. That's been 20 years in the making, and so it's an incredible achievement, and we thank you so much. Last year also, we were celebrating the Affordable Connectivity Program, which provided subsidies to 23 million households, not people, households, so they could afford high-speed internet. Unfortunately, in May, the funding ran out. Since then, we've been working with Congresswoman Clark. Have you noticed a pattern? Congresswoman Clark. And other partners in the tech and the nonprofit world to get the funding restored. It is not too late, but we need help from everyone here, everyone on the Hill, Senator Schumer, Speaker Johnson, it's not too late. We can get it done, and so we hope that we'll get it done before the year is out. The next thing kind of in our greatest hits for this last year was a culmination of another thing that we celebrated last year. Senator Duckworth was here last year as we were celebrating the passage of the Martha Wright Reed Act. That required the FCC to adopt rules to help incarcerated people and their families so they could afford communications. And the FCC did that just last July. So it capped rates much lower. It established for the first time limits for video communications, and it ended the kickbacks between the phone companies and the carceral institutions so that we are going to have so much more justice, as Reverend Amanda said, rolling down for incarcerated people and their families. And we wanted to take a minute to especially thank two organizations that really did a great help, which was the Brattle Group and Jenner and Block. I think we have folks from both of those places here today to give a hi, Paroma Sanyal and Greg Capobianco, Paroma of Brattle and Greg of Jenner and Block, and also just wanted to thank Greg's colleague, Rebecca Goodhart at Jenner and Block. They gave hundreds upon hundreds of hours to build that record in a very technical way so that the FCC could do its part of the job. So we really wanted to thank them. So these are just a few of the successes that we had in the last year. We also worked with Georgetown Law Center, and I'm really glad we have a bunch of Georgetown students here today, but last year we worked to create a report about consumer protection for incarcerated people at the state level. We supported a new FCC proposal mandating disclosure of AI-generated content and political advertising. And just last Friday, we joined an amicus brief to support the FCC's effort to stop more media consolidation. Whew. Okay. That was just the highlights. But thanks to all of you in this room, without which all this work would not be done. Its partnerships and collaboration is really incredible. So now, I am delighted to turn to our first award of the morning, the Newton N. Minow Award. We could not be more delighted to honor Alan Davidson this morning. Alan has a very long title, but that's because he has a very big job. Alan is the Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Communications and Information and the Administrator of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. So what does that mean? The NTIA serves as the White House's voice on communications policy. But more important, in recent years, Congress and the President have been giving NTIA job after job on our most important communications initiatives. Front and center is their role in distributing the famous $42 billion for internet access and internet deployment under the bipartisan infrastructure law. And thanks to Congress's direction and NTIA's leadership, every state in the country now has a broadband plan and a digital equity plan. That is no small achievement. NTIA, and that's not all, even on internet. NTIA's Internet for All initiative also distributed funds to historically Black colleges and universities, to tribal lands, and to promote digital equity. By the end of last year, NTIA had distributed $3.7 billion. And just yesterday, the applications were due for the new competitive digital equity grants, and I imagine there are a few people in this room who are very tired. NTIA is also the leader in collecting data about broadband connectivity and use, issued recently a report about AI accountability, and is conducting a major proceeding on the intersection of privacy, equity, and civil rights. And that doesn't even cover NTIA's role developing a national spectrum strategy or mediating between many public uses and private uses of spectrum, which is not an easy job. You don't want to be in between those guys. And beyond all that, Alan brings a wealth of experience to the job. He started Google's public policy office around 2005, and he was just one person. I remember meeting with him at the time. He worked in the nonprofit sectors at the Center for Democracy and Technology in New America, was at the Mozilla Foundation before he joined NTIA, and you might say that Alan is the first NTIA administrator whose career started with the I, the information, rather than the T in the acronym. But now that I've detailed Alan's incredible achievements and his agency, I want to turn to what I think is Alan's superpower. He has managed to attract a huge number of the best and the brightest people to work on these issues. Honestly, when the Biden administration started, I kept thinking, Alan, leave some good people for other people, other agencies. Luckily, he did, so we have great people everywhere, but he's done an amazing job. And in fact, we're so pleased because our honoree from just a couple of years ago, Francella Ochilo, just joined the NTIA very recently. In addition, Alan welcomes everyone. I remember being invited to meetings, especially early on when nobody was really maybe meeting in person yet. And Alan's like, no, you have to come in. We want to talk to you. They celebrate Pi Day at NTIA with abandon. And Alan also has much enthusiasm for his fellow New Jersey native, Bruce Springsteen. So it takes both hard work and fun to do a great job. And before we turn to Alan's remarks and getting him his plaque, I wanted to say a word about the person who this legacy honors. This is the first time we've presented the Newton Minow Award since he died last year. We really mourn the passing of an incredibly great man, and we are so pleased to have his daughter, Nell, with us today. We're also pleased because today we actually have in the room the 3 people who have ever received the Newton Minow Award, because Mignon Clyburn, Michael Copps, and now Alan Davidson are the only 3 people who ever got it, so that's pretty exciting. When Newton Minow was chair of the FCC, he accomplished many, many things. In his most famous speech about the technology of his time, he said, "When television is good, nothing is better. But when it is bad, nothing is worse." Well, that's true about a lot of technology and the technology of this time. For example, if AI can be accountable and transparent, nothing could be better. But without the work policymakers are doing right now to make it so, nothing could be worse. So, to Alan for leading this once-in-a-generation opportunity to promote these technologies in service to the public, we are pleased to present Alan Davidson with the Newton and Minow Award.
Thank you, Cheryl. Boy, that's a lovely. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you also. We've known each other for a long time. Thank you for being such a tireless force and such a tireless advocate for the public interest in our space. Yes, right. And I just want to say my sincere thanks to UCC Media Justice Ministry for this honor. It's a privilege to share this day with my fellow honorees, particularly Congresswoman Clark, who's been such a singular voice for tech equity on Capitol Hill, to Paul Farhi, longtime reader, first-time caller, but thank you for your legacy. And I did want to also acknowledge Nell Minow, who was right there, who I saw earlier today. And I don't have to tell you what an impact your father's legacy has had and continues to have on so many of us. So thank you for being here. Cheryl mentioned that I come from the I side of NTIA, and that journey started for me as an undergraduate at MIT. And I had the chance there to work with a great nuclear physicist, Phil Morrison. And Professor Morrison spent his early career developing atomic weapons, serving as part of the Manhattan Project. He then spent much of the later part of his career trying to stop the use and proliferation of the very same weapons that he had helped create. The lesson was not lost on me, right? Humanity has the power to create technologies that can improve our lives, connect the globe, tackle the big challenges that lie in front of us. But it also has the power to build tools to monitor our population, to divide our societies, to weaken the vulnerable. And the choices to build technologies for good or for evil, in service of freedom or control, to promote equity or sow division, Those choices are ours. The pursuit of technology in the public interest, in the service of people, has animated most of my career. And it also lies at the heart of what we do at NTIA. Every day we encounter those choices about technology in our work about spectrum, on issues like privacy or cybersecurity, internet governance, our newest efforts to support responsible AI innovation and access while also addressing the very real risks including risks from bias and discrimination, those very real risks that it raises today. And it's a privilege to do that work. But really, nowhere is the impact of our work more apparent right now than our efforts to connect the unconnected in this country. It's hard to believe that here today in America in 2024, I know so many of you know this, but it's incredible to believe that there are still millions of people, millions of families that lack that basic high-speed internet connection that they need to thrive in the modern digital economy. We have been talking about the digital divide in this country for over 25 years. Many of you have been there all through it. And finally, thanks to the leadership of this president, thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law, we finally have the resources to do something very serious about it. The president and the vice president have given us a very simple but ambitious mission: connect everyone in America with reliable, affordable, high-speed internet service. We call it the Internet for All Initiative, and we mean all. And that initiative, the Internet for All Initiative, is historic. And we are well on our way to delivering on it. Cheryl actually gave a pretty good rundown of our progress so far. And I'll say we have awarded billions of dollars already. We have connected tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if you look at the broad swath of programs that the administration's implementing. We're on time and on track to deliver on our biggest project, the BEAD project, which will be the cleanup batter in our grant-making programs. But I could tell you more about that, but I actually want to just say that one of the great privileges of this job is being able to travel all around the country and meet the people who are being impacted by this work. And for me, it's all about their stories. I know a lot of you have those stories too. For me, it's about a grandmother who I met in Bunkie, Louisiana, an hour out of Baton Rouge, who was literally trembling with rage and frustration about how hard it was to connect her grandchildren with Zoom school during the pandemic with a shaky wireless connection. It's a teenager named Ali who I met outside of Phoenix, who cut school early with a couple of his friends to go to a place to get refurbished laptops because they were sick of doing their homework on a phone. It's another grandmother who I met in Tanana, a native community on the banks of the Yukon River in the middle of Alaska, who literally is paying over $500 a month for terrible internet service. It's Chris, who I met a couple weeks ago in Holly, Michigan, who's a former auto worker, who's now on a factory line building the OLTs, the equipment that's going to go into the networks that we're paying for. That work's being done now in the United States. There are so many stories like that. You have your stories too, but there are millions more like them. And the truth is that the work that we are doing, the work that you all are doing, is changing their lives. And that is a very rare privilege in service, to have that opportunity to really make that kind of impact on people's lives. All of this is why I'm so pleased today to be receiving this award named for Newton Minow. His speech on television and the public interest may be best known for the term vast wasteland, but his focus on the public interest could apply to all of the technology challenges that we face today. Minow called on us then, as we are called on today, to embrace the critical role that government must play in ensuring that new technologies, television or AI or otherwise, serve the public interest. Minow understood that, Everett Parker understood that, and they both fought for it. And that fight continues. Those of you gathered here have been carrying that torch, some for many years. At NTIA, our mission is to create a better connected world, and our staff, current and former, are deeply committed to that mission. I know many of them, a lot of them are here in the room, a lot of them are watching online, so while I am honored and humbled to receive this award, I just want to say I really share it with all of them. Thank you for your service. So, to conclude, I'll just say, and if you've heard me speak out in the States recently, you've heard me say something like this, because I do really believe that this is a once-in-a-generation moment of opportunity. We will not get these resources again to connect everybody online. And generations before us did really big things, right? They connected everybody in the country with electricity and with water. They built the interstate highway system. This is our generation's big infrastructure moment. This is our chance to connect everybody in America with what they need to thrive in the modern digital economy. It's going to take a huge amount of work. We need everybody to do their part. The coming months and years are going to be critical in this program, and we need this community's attention to help make sure that these programs are as impactful as they can be. Together, I know that we can make this dream of the internet for all a reality at last. So thank you, and thank you. Sorry.
Good morning again, and what a great start. Now we know why we're here and what we have to do. I'm Donna Scopper, and I am a proud member of Safe Haven United Church of Christ in Brooklyn, New York, where we all vote for the Congresswoman. And I am 52 years a pastor in the United Church of Christ, and you can't have been around that long and not have been mentored by Everett Parker over and over and over again. So thank you, Everett. Thank you so much. This morning, it is my pleasure to honor our Congresswoman, a full-service Congresswoman, whom I first met at Federal Plaza in New York, where she had a knack for talking her way into rooms where people were about to be unjustly and unmercifully deported or detained, and she brought many of us right behind her. So I thank you for that. And go on to say that whenever there is a communications issue, whenever there is one, her name and her work shows up. Whenever it has an element of justice in it, she is the first person to alert us. She'll be leading the way. And I'm going to name 10 concrete things that she's done, all right? 10. Maybe it keeps you up at night. I certainly hope so. She serves as co-chair of the Multicultural Media Caucus. She worked with Commissioner Starks to ensure that the FCC readopted the broadcast workforce diversity reporting. Broadcasting is just the beginning. She's also introduced legislation to address algorithmic bias and concerns about artificial intelligence, so smart, what we've already heard today. She did it before those issues got to the front pages. We appreciate that. Fourth, she's introduced bills to ban biometric technologies in public housing where they are needed, to mandate corporate bias assessments for AI. 6, curb the risk of deep fake technology. And 7, address the use of AI in political broadcasting. These are concrete, real things that have to happen if justice is to be real. Ongoing, her leadership is recognized. She serves on the bipartisan House Task Force on AI, and there she and her marvelous staff have been relentless in pursuing funding so that low-income households can have affordable, high-speed internet service through the Affordable Connectivity Program. She and her staff have introduced 2 pieces of legislation to refund the program. one of which, get ready, has been co-sponsored by a majority of the House of Representatives. This is called an achievement. We feel assured of success in all 10 of these concrete areas and in success for our democracy to become more real. With our full service Congresswoman leading the way, we thank you very much. It is therefore my immense pleasure to present the Everett C. Parker Award to Representative Yvette D. Clarke. Would you come and join me? Maybe you'd like the plaque.
To Reverend Donna Scarper, to Administrator Alan Davidson, to all other distinguished and fellow honorees, members of the UCC Media Justice Ministry, greetings and good morning. I'm Congresswoman Yvette D. Clarke, and I proudly represent the wonderful people of Central and Southwest Brooklyn. And I want to thank Reverend Donna Scarper for her kind introduction, and thank you to each of you in attendance this morning for the privilege of speaking with you at this historic First Congregational United Church of Christ. I am profoundly grateful to the First Congregational United Church of Christ family, the United Church of Christ Media Justice Ministry, and its board of directors, and everyone in attendance for welcoming me this morning. Know that I stand before you in awe of the immense legacy of advocacy, compassion, and action that have defined this congregation for decades. It is my absolute honor to join you for this 42nd annual Everett C. Parker Ethics in Telecommunications Lecture and Awards Breakfast. And let me say that I'm so very proud to stand before you, the leaders, change makers, and visionaries who are brick by brick, mind by mind, home by home, and heart to heart, pushing this nation forward and shedding the shortcomings of its past. I consider myself blessed to have received this historic award at this transformative venue, both of which bear the name of a man who devoted his life to ensuring that communities of color were equally represented in the broadcast space and free from the bias and discrimination that have too long plagued our families. Recall that in 2012, as he reflected upon his incredible body of work and all that he achieved across his remarkable life, Dr. Parker said, quote, "I want them to remember that I was a guy who fought like the devil for the rights of minorities," end quote. I believe Dr. Parker would be quite pleased to know that he was quite prescient in that wish. But I believe he would also remind us that the work is not yet finished. Throughout my career in Congress, I've fought to ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion in media spaces are not merely part of the plan, but at its very core. Because truly, the diversity of our nation demands us to encourage this kind of representation that can meet the needs of all of our communities. America's true potential has always lain within its historically underrepresented communities, that folks in urban and rural areas who are too often left out and left behind. And to support and empower those who have been historically marginalized, we must first narrow the gaps that have helped contribute to their exclusion. We know that above all, two great barriers before the digital divide are access and affordability. With the necessary infrastructure simply not existing in many rural, remote, and oftentimes urban communities, I and my like-minded colleagues are in Congress took action to put them on the right path forward. We passed the bipartisan infrastructure law with its historic investment in broadband deployment through the BEAD program. Through our work, countless Americans in every corner of this nation, as was indicated by Administrator Davidson, who were for too long underserved and overlooked, were finally given the tools they need to thrive in our modern-day civil society. But as I've said, the second part of bridging the digital divide is just as important. That is increasing affordability, because too many households that want broadband simply cannot consistently afford it. During the last several years, the Affordable Connectivity Program was essential in getting tens of millions of households online by helping them afford it and making sure that low-cost broadband was available and represented in broadcast spaces and free from the bias and discrimination. That were available to folks who might want it, but are struggling to pay the bills and get online and stay online. The ACP was the biggest broadband affordability effort in our nation's history, with more than 23 million households relied on it, and it has been extremely successful. Truly, the ACP represented one of our best tools to close the digital divide. But unfortunately, as it often does, unfortunately, petty politics, callous indifference stood in the way of moral progress. The Affordable Connectivity Program's funding was left to expire, stripping communities from Brooklyn to Washington to rural and middle America of the access to affordable, reliable internet that they've come to rely on. So now it's time for Congress to act. To folks who might want it, but are struggling to pay the bills and get online and stay online, the ACP was one of the biggest broadband affordability efforts in our nation's history. And we are in the midst of making sure that our colleagues are held accountable. We cannot give up on this progress that we've made closing the digital divide. Our communities, futures, and ability to thrive in the digital age depends on our actions today. So please, let's get to work. And let us all be remembered as the people who saw the digital divide and who, like the great Reverend Dr. Parker, fought like devils to fix it. Or some would say even saints to fix it. Let me close by just saying how humbled I am by this honoring this morning. This doesn't say or indicate to me in any way that I've made it, but that I've got much more work to do. And I know that together we will succeed in our essential mission to make sure that every community across this nation knows that the work that we have put in have left a legacy not only for this generation, but future generations to come. So, as they say in Brooklyn, New York, one love. Stay safe, stay strong, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Clark, for that inspiring call to action. My name is Sarah Fitzgerald, and I'm a member of the board of UCC Media Justice. I was thrilled when my longtime friend and former Washington Post colleague, Paul Farhi, accepted our invitation to deliver this year's Everett C. Parker Lecture. Paul retired last December after a 35-year career at the Post. During that time, he covered the FCC as a financial reporter, and then spent the last 13 years as the paper's media reporter. During that time, Paul was a 3-time winner of a National Press Club Award for media reporting and criticism. Short of being a correspondent in a war zone, there may be no more difficult job in journalism than covering the media, because you may have to report on your colleagues and your bosses. And yet, despite that, Paul has always been one of the most popular and well-respected reporters in the Post orbit. Here's a story that helps explain why. In the fall of 2012, the Graham family made the difficult decision to sell the Post to Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon. As then Post editor Martin Barron recounted in his book, Don Graham first suggested that Barron himself should write the story. But Barron believed that the sale should be covered like any other news story, and that meant turning to his beat reporter, Paul Farhi. Barron reached Paul when Paul and his wife Lisa, who's here today, were enjoying the last day of an out-of-town vacation, telling him to stand by his phone at home at 9:30 the next morning, a Sunday. When he phoned, Barron shared the news of the impending sale and told Paul to start working on a story that would be kept under wraps until 4:30 on Monday afternoon. Paul tracked down Bezos and conducted a short interview. He then stayed up most of the night writing the story. He sent Barron a final version before heading to the office around noon on Monday. As Paul drove into work, a good friend called on his cell phone. Paul said a big story was coming. "Let me guess," the friend replied, "the Post is going to be sold." He reeled off the name of 3 potential buyers, and one was Amazon. Paul recalled that he almost had a heart attack on the Whitehurst Freeway. The next hours were agonizing as he feared the story would leak, but Paul demonstrated he was the right person for that job. When the Post staff gathered at 4:15, only a few people in the building knew what was about to happen. One editor turned to Paul and said, "Whatever this is, it sounds like you're going to have to write about it." Paul replied, "I already have." Paul was clearly trusted to manage that difficult assignment and to stay focused on delivering the news amid a very emotional time for all the Post staff. Like many colleagues of our vintage, Paul has now left the Post, but we're all glad he continues to find new outlets for his insights. He seems busier than ever writing for publications like The Atlantic and the Columbia Journalism Review, and working on the Medill School of Journalism, with the Medill School of Journalism, on its annual State of Local News report. Please join me in welcoming Paul Farhi to deliver the 42nd Annual Everett C. Parker Lecture.
All right, put my papers down. Get your papers out of the way.
You get all the other ones.
Okay.
That's all right.
All right, all right.
You don't have experience at this, right?
Okay, you want your papers? No? Good morning. How are you? And thank you, Sarah, for such a nice introduction. I should note that Sarah and I worked at the Post together when I first started in 1988. She had already been there. And that was way back in the print-only days. It's hard to imagine that now. There was no internet, no Facebook. If you wanted news, you got it on ink and paper. You remember ink and paper? It seems like a long time ago. And so thank you, Sarah, for reminding me that I'm old. I am honored to be asked to give this presentation because I know of the work of UCC, and I did back when I was a reporter reporting in the 90s on the FCC. A quick anecdote, when I was a reporter at the Post, I'd sometimes come across a filing from the UCC, and I thought, why is a church group filing on these particular issues? And then I read up, because it was one of those rabbit holes, about the long activism in communications policy, including advocacy for civil rights, about the WLBT case, and its role, Everett Parker's role, particularly in spurring the EEO rules. And at that point, my question changed. I thought, why aren't more church groups filing petitions at the FCC? We all have a stake in these issues, and we should all be involved. In any case, I am honored to be here. I want to start off by telling you about a trip I recently took. This is going to sound like an essay entitled, What I Did with My Summer Vacation, but please bear with me, there's a real point here. I hope it will make you understand something you've probably heard a lot about, and that's the crisis in local news and what that crisis actually means to real people. In August, I traveled to a little town called Cairo, Illinois. Cairo is spelled C-A-I-R-O, like the city in Egypt, but as I quickly found out, it's pronounced Cairo. I went there to report for the Medill School's annual project called The State of Local News, which was mentioned. The 2024 report will be out in a few weeks. In any case, Cairo is a very interesting place with a fascinating history. It's located at the bottom of Illinois, at the point where the Mississippi River and the Ohio rivers meet, kind of like the Potomac and the Anacostia. And if you're looking at a map, I had to look at this map several times to figure this out, Missouri is on the left and Kentucky is on the right. It's closer to Memphis than it is to Chicago. It's basically the most northern town in the south or the most southern town in the north. And this location is very important. It's a key to its history. If you were a slave in Missouri, Kentucky, Arkansas, Tennessee, or even deeper south, Cairo was the first patch of free soil that you could reach by going up the Mississippi. It was the promised land. There's a scene in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which I reread for about the fourth time this summer, in which Huck and Jim, the fugitive slave, are floating down the Mississippi past St. Louis, and they think they see Cairo in the fog, and they rejoice because they think they've made it. They think they can now head north up the Ohio River and go deeper into freedom. Tragically, they're mistaken because they bypassed the town in the fog and floated deeper into slave territory. And it's an accurate story in a way, because many of the town's residents can trace their family history to the migration out of slavery and into freedom. Well, anyway, after the Civil War, Cairo grew a lot. It was a steamboat port, it was a railroad and ferry terminus, it had agriculture, it had timber, it had coal, it had a little bit of manufacturing as well. And the people who promoted it suggested it was going to be a boom town. It was going to be the next St. Louis, the next Cincinnati, the next Louisville, the next mighty river city. It didn't happen. The steamboats got replaced by diesel barges, the ferries got replaced by bridges, the railroads got replaced by highways and interstates. And that's an old story. You know, the town declined and began to steadily lose people. Particularly its young people, which I think is the most injurious thing that can happen to a place. And not unrelated to this decline, Cairo had lots of racial tension. In the late 60s and the early 70s, some of the descendants of those slaves that settled there, they rebelled against the white-dominated establishment, protesting against police brutality and hiring discrimination. It tore the town apart. More people left as a result. And then, a few decades later, came the internet, which no one recognized as devastating, but it was. In 2020, as a result of the internet and all that it eroded, the local newspaper, the Cairo Citizen, closed after 156 years of publication. Gone. The newspaper office, which I visited, is now an Elks Club. Today, Cairo and the county, it's in Alexander County, doesn't have a single professional source of news. There's no newspaper, there's no digital site, there's no TV or radio station. or ethnic publication. There's not even a blog that I could find. It's a news desert, classically. And as I'm sure you know, that's not exactly an unusual result these days. According to the Medill School count, there are 212 counties in America that are news desert, and then there are 228 more that are on their way to becoming news deserts. That's 450 or so counties out of about 3,000. Those counties are home to about 55 million people. And it gets worse. On average last year, 2 newspapers a week, most of these are weeklies, went out of business. Right now, about half the counties in America have only one news source. And many of the places that arguably aren't news deserts are served by what has become known as ghost newspapers. They exist on paper, but they're produced by a skeleton staff, sometimes from somewhere outside the community. So even the real newspapers in a lot of these places are a shadow of what they used to be due to the relentless amount of cutbacks. It's not just happening in poor, rural, and isolated communities either. News deserts are common in places that have older populations, that are less densely populated, and where people have lower levels of education. Interestingly, Medill found this, it's happening in places that have a lot of evangelicals and a lot of white retirees. I think that bears a little more investigation as to why it's happening there. There's also a kind of de facto redlining that's going on as all of this happens. And by that I mean, many of the digital news startups that you've probably heard so much about are located in big cities and in prosperous suburbs. They're not going to the places where there are news deserts, the places where there is arguably the most need for this kind of information. Economically, they don't want to take the chance. The disappointing fact is that there are very few examples of startup news operations to fill the void in places like Cairo. Okay, so what is the news desert, what does a news desert look like and feel like? And that's why I went to Cairo in the first place. I have to say my first impression of the place was not terribly promising. The main drag, which is called Washington Avenue, it's lined with a lot of crumbling, empty storefronts and abandoned buildings. The commercial street, which is called Commercial Avenue, the heart of the business district, doesn't have too much business or commerce going on there. And Cairo is a place that lacks a lot of things, not just a newspaper. There's no drugstore, there's no gas station, there's no movie theater, not a lot of places to eat or buy groceries. The city hospital shut down in 1986. Housing, especially the affordable kind, is in short supply too, which is true of a lot of communities, especially after the federal government decided to tear down a couple of big housing projects. But it's also, I found, a community that's rich with people who care a lot about this place. And I was pleased to meet some of them. They were very welcoming. And one of the things they told me was that if you want to know what's going on in a place that doesn't have a professional source of information, you have to rely on word of mouth. You have to rely on your neighbors. People have been doing that, I guess, since the beginning of time. But, you know, at the same time, people in Cairo don't lack for information about what's going on right here. They don't lack for what's going on in New York or what's happening in Hollywood. There's no need to worry about people not getting national news. The presidential campaign is as actively covered by news sources that are available in Cairo as it is in Washington, D.C. CNN, NBC, CBS, PBS, Fox News, papers like the Washington Post, and the New York Times. Those sources of information are easily accessible and they're free, some of them at least. But what if you want to find out about the Cairo City Council? Try finding anything then. It's pretty hard. And back to that word of mouth thing is the problem in talking with your friends is that's not a very reliable way to get information. People like to gossip, they like to brag, they like to exaggerate. They get a lot of stuff wrong. Reporters do that too, but they do it more often. And they can be very mean and cruel to each other. If you've ever looked at Facebook or Instagram, you'll know this. So when the Cairo Citizen folded in 2020, the first things to go for people in the town was news about how the government is or is not functioning. News about the cops, the courts, the mayor, the city council, the school board, the county housing authority. And that's the stuff that an informed citizenry needs to know how to govern itself. You know, how democracy is supposed to work. Here's a small example that a fellow named Stephen Tarver, who's a local activist, told me about. He mentioned that the city council was considering renewing the city's contract with the local power utility for the next 10 years. And this is the kind of thing that we in the newsroom used to call a DBI story. Anybody? No? DBI stands for dull but important. And in Cairo, it's really important. About a third of the people who live in town are living below the poverty line. That's about 3 times the national rate. And any increase in utility rates is going to make a huge difference in their lives. Now, obviously, the city council knows about these negotiations, and the utility knows about these negotiations. But what about the ratepayers? What about the citizens? What about the users of this utility? Do they know about it? And wouldn't they like to have a voice in this? I'm sure you can find some mention of this on somebody's Facebook page, but I don't think it's the most reliable way to get complicated information about this negotiation. Mr. Tarver knows what academic studies about news deserts have long borne out, and that it's that the lack of local news means people aren't just less informed, but they are less engaged in governing themselves. He said people don't get involved because they don't know what's at stake. And let me just also say that when people in Cairo do get something like local news, it's not very local at all. It comes from a distance. There are 4 daily newspapers in the region and several television stations in the area. But none of them is closer than 35 miles from Cairo. And some are even further away, which means they don't cover DBI stories or anything else often for weeks and months that's going on in Cairo. It's important to understand what they do cover. What they do cover is the sensational and the lurid, the extreme and the unusual. So Cairo isn't in anyone's news until something horrendous happens, which it occasionally does. And this is very destructive. These sporadic stories reinforce a one-dimensional caricature of this community. And the reason for that is there's so little else to find out about Cairo that you only hear about the bad stuff. I like to call this news imperialism. It's the conquest by the distant news haves of the news have-nots. They've colonized the place. But in talking with people in Cairo, you quickly find out what people really miss isn't just the government news, the big stuff. They miss the small stuff too. It's the little things that give a town like this its shape, its character, its flavor, and really its cohesion. It's graduations, it's weddings, family reunions, obits, church and community news. The stories about the kid who scored the winning basket or starred in the school play or died serving his or her country. People might not even already know about some of these things. It's a small town after all, and everybody talks. But seeing them in the local paper validates the event. It creates history, it creates memory, it creates something lasting so that people who don't know anything about the town can find out about it. I've written for publications for more than 40 years. Yes, I'm old. And I haven't saved very many of the things that I've written. But you know what I have saved? I've saved the clips that mention my children. I cherish those way more than my stories about the FCC. And now, you know, I don't think I'm all that different. You multiply that by every kid in every town, and every parent and every grandparent of every kid in every town, and you quickly sum up what's being lost. I love what a guy named Don Patton, a guy I talked to there, a lifelong resident of Cairo, told me. He said, just as background, Mr. Patton delivered the Cairo Citizen when he was in 8th grade. He's now 73 and retired, and he's lived there all his life. He said, a newspaper gives a town or city life. You know the people you're reading about. You identify with them. It gives us a sense that we are a community. So the question is, what do we do about the ever-growing loss of local news? There are a number of things going on, and you may have heard about some of them. And faced with this slow-moving crisis, philanthropies have stepped in. There's many initiatives that are philanthropic in nature to help the press, but I'll mention just one of them. It's the Press Forward effort, which has been organized by the MacArthur Foundation. They put together a coalition of about 25 different philanthropies to fund news startups and news operations. They announced this last year, and they're going to distribute $500 million over 5 years to help shore up existing news operations and start new ones. You know, it's a good start, but given the size of this problem, it's really just a drop in a river the size of the Mississippi. Meanwhile, there are a number of proposals rattling around some state legislatures to help local news, and I should also say in Congress. Some of these measures have even passed. The state of Illinois, for example, since we're talking about Cairo, Illinois, in May passed a law granting $25 million in tax credits to local news organizations that hire and retain journalists. Again, that's laudable, there's no question. It's not going to help the Cairo Citizen, which is dead and gone, and may be dead and gone forever. Which leads me to this observation. It took a few generations to erode our information infrastructure, and it will take another generation or longer to build it back up, if we can build it back up. We need more help from the government, federal, state, and local. It pains me to say that because we, as members of the press, want to keep our distance from the government. We cover the government, we don't have any ties to it, certainly financial. But if journalism is essential for preserving democratic self-government, maybe democratic self-government should preserve journalism. And so here is my big wind-up. This is the part where you all come in. You who make policy, you who affect policy, and you who just care about policy. I urge you, as a certain former First Lady said recently in a different context, to do something. Do something. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you for having me. Thank you. I don't know how much time we have, but if my favorite part of any presentation like this is questions, comments, complaints, compliments, for as long as time permits. Do we have time, or we're very little? Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Wonderful. That is wonderful. Thank you. Got one more? One more? Anyone? No? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul. We cannot thank you enough for sharing your thoughts. My name is Emily McKenna. I am also a member of the United Church of Christ Media Justice Board. I serve as Director of Faith Formation and the Office Administration of Enfield United Church of Christ in Connecticut. Typically, though, I just tell people that I'm a church lady. I'm delighted to transition us into the closing time today. I bring you greetings from United Church of Christ General Minister and President, the Reverend Karen Georgia Thompson. Last year, Reverend Thompson became the first woman to be elected president of the UCC. Reverend Thompson is sorry she couldn't join us today. She sends her warm congratulations on such a great event. And we are lucky because she does have a virtual prayer to share with us this morning. After Reverend Thompson's prayer, we will hear closing music from the Reverend Mia McLean. Mia McLean is an esteemed musical artist, composer, and pastor at the Riverside Baptist Church here in DC. She will be performing her own musical composition, We've Arrived, and is joined by drummer Dominic Taylor. 3 years ago, when the Parker Lecture had to be held online because of the pandemic, we shared a video of a song by Reverend McLean that was incorporated into an online worship service at that year's UCC's national meeting. We're thrilled to welcome her back now in person. Please join me as we listen to Reverend Thompson's prayer, expressing her wish that God grants us peace. We invite you to join in a moment of silent personal reflection, using whatever words or beliefs are meaningful to you. And after we hear our music, you are invited to go in peace. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Philippians 4, verses 6 through 7 reminds us, "Do not worry about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God." Wars and conflicts continue to escalate around the world. Injustices and inequalities manifest as racism, discrimination, gender-based violence, economic disparities, and other issues manifesting around us. In these days of struggle and unrest, I am inviting you to join me in a season of prayer we are calling the People's Prayers for Peace. This is an invitation to the church to pray together for peace and justice with those who are suffering, to pray for change, and to pray for courage in the living of these days. Prayer must accompany the action and advocacy we take as we seek peace and a just world for all. This is an open invitation to anyone who feels led to offer a prayer, to end all violence, and to bring about peace where it is absent. Join me as we pray God's peace for the world. Holy God, be present with those who are in need, and where there is war and unrest, we pray your peace will prevail. Hear our prayers, O God, we pray. Amen.
The future that we dreamed upon has risen like the sun at dawn. It's here at last, and life is short. We must move fast or fall apart. I know this is our calling, and I do believe in signs. The arrow's pointing straight ahead. I do believe that we've arrived. Oh, I believe we have arrived. Don't you hear the children calling? melodies across the sky, voices of a nation bound together. I listen to the words of crying. Harmony will bring us light, showing that we have arrived. The roses bloom on wilted sand. The sunlight burns a helping hand. The wicked rule the souls of fools, while evil runs across the land. It's time for wisdom to prevail. The truth of earth shall be unveiled, and wisdom shall reclaim the night, showing us the light. And we, oh, we believe we have arrived. Don't you hear the children calling? Melodies across the sky, voices of a nation bound together. I listen to the words they're crying. Harmony will bring us light, showing that we have arrived. The voices of the youth will lead the way. People running through the streets, commencing singing, bringing hope to all the corners of the world, opening their eyes. Yes, we have arrived. Don't you hear the children calling? Melodies across the sky, voices of a nation bound together. I listen to the words they're crying. Harmony will bring us light, showing that we have arrived. We have arrived. We have arrived. Today's the day. Now is the time. We have arrived. Harmony will bring us light, showing that we have arrived. We have arrived. We have arrived.
Amazing, right? Thank you so much. Have a wonderful morning. Thank you for joining us.